I don't understand the countdown. I'm going to just put that out there right now. Why don't you start with and 4, 3? Because it's actually a 5 count, but it's a 6 count when you count it from 5.
The whole, do we go on 3 or 1, 2, 3, then go?
Yeah. Is it 1, 2, 3, go?
Or 1, 2, 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Go on 3 means
That's
1, 2,
especially important
go.
If you're trying to coordinate pulling your partner off of an exploding toilet in his bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. We're going on 3 means 1, 2, go.
I know. I like 1, 2, 3, go.
So going on 4.
Or go. Listen, if it's a bomb situation, we're probably blowing up.
Yeah, we definitely are. Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond, sometimes even from the apocalypse. You can find us on YouTube at Terror in Tandem, on Instagram at Terror in Tandem, and you'll always find our latest and greatest episode on our website, terrorintandem.com.
So hard to pick a favorite of these gems.
I know.
Speaking of which, hello.
Witch?
Yeah, witches.
You never mentioned witches, and no one was speaking of them.
I'm looking at one right now.
Rude.
So,
you shouldn't talk to your mother that way.
I don't talk to her. Anyway, so this episode, it's an interesting one because I went at it with a totally different attitude and came at the other end of it really bummed the fuck out.
Yeah.
So obviously what we're talking about
is the apocalypse.
The end of all things.
Yeah.
Apocalypse from
even
the Greek
end
word
of the existence as you know it.
Yeah.
It might not be the end of all things.
No, but I mean, it comes from the ancient Greek meaning, like the end of days, Armageddon.
Yeah. Right.
So we're talking apocalyptic horror today, or kind of more specifically, post-apocalyptic horror. Because, as they say, the lucky ones were the ones who died early on.
Yeah.
So yeah, grim. But it's a horror podcast, so that happens.
Well, what makes something apocalyptic? I want to talk a little bit about
Webster's Dictionary. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, let's get into it.
So, apocalyptic literature foretells supernaturally inspired cataclysmic events that transpire the end of the world, which we sort of mentioned. A product of the Judeo-Christian tradition, apocalyptic literature is characteristically synonymous with esoteric language and pessimistic view of the present and treats final events as imminent. So the earliest apocalypse mentioned are in Jewish works around 200 BCE. Prophets foretold of the coming of disasters.
Ruh-roh.
And during the domination of Palestine and the revolt of the Maccabees, the pessimistic view of the present became coupled with the expectation of an apocalyptic scenario.
Oh, yeah. When you're surrounded by war and everything's burning down and someone says, hey, what do you think the future looks like? Yeah. You're probably like, I don't know, a worse version of this?
One of the most famous and influential in the early Jewish apocalypses is the part of the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
Written around 167 BCE.
That old corker.
Which is attributed to a wise man who lived 4 centuries earlier, where Daniel recounts a series of visions he's had. And he sees a succession of 4 terrible beasts, which I'm imagining that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is sort of coming out of.
It all gets retooled through the ages.
Yep. the other Jewish apocalypses, the book of Enoch, the fourth book of Ezra, and the second and third books of Baruch.
Which are also part of a collective known as the Gnostic Gospels. Those were the Gospels that were left out of the King James Version of the Bible.
Yeah, they're not in the Hebrew Bible.
They are considered Gospels, but they just weren't chosen by a British monarch. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Most regard early Christianity as apocalyptic.
Oh, just early Christianity? It's gotten so much sunnier.
The intention on the second coming of Christ to preside over the last judgment and the end of the world specifically. And the last book of the New Testament, known as the Apocalypse of St. John,
the book of
the Revelation,
yeah,
offers a vibrant, sometimes lurid account of imminent crisis, judgment, and salvation.
Okay, quick aside. This is a nerdy pet peeve of mine. As someone I've read the Bible a couple of times, because I really wanted to be sure about my belief system, and I hate it when people call it the Book of Revelations.
Yes, there is a book. There is a Revelations, but it's not this.
It's not that. It's the Book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Zach De La Rocha, looking at you, pal. But yeah.
So
rant over.
Now we sort of move through the Middle Ages, where it sort of moved away. It's the genre moved away
from what?
After the Middle Ages.
What do you mean?
The apocalyptic genre moved away from literature after the Middle Ages. Until then, it became referenced in more modern literary works like Nathaniel West's Day of the Locusts in 1939, and then in films like The Seventh Seal and La Dolce Vita.
Yeah.
Then the Left Behind series, published in 1995 by Tim Lehane and Jerry B. Jenkins, describe apocalyptic events in particularly violent terms.
Yeah, that's not the only way. Okay, all right.
It's estimated that 65 million copies of books in the Left Behind series were in print by the early 21st century.
So I remember when those books came out, I was in a bookstore and I came across this series, Left Behind, and I read the back of it, and it's like Antichrist, the Rapture, the Devil, and I'm like, holy fuck, and it's a series? This is great. And roughly 30 to 50 pages into it, realized exactly what I was reading. And then once Kirk Cameron made a movie version of it, kind of knew exactly what it was. But yeah, talk about fucking bait and switch.
Yeah,
I was pissed.
So that's sort of a historic literary view of the term and understanding of apocalypse. Before I get into some of the characteristics of the trope in horror and some examples there, what do you have to say about early apocalyptic iteration? The
word itself is really synonymous and centered around the concept of destruction. There in the Book of Revelation, there's the Great Destroyer is the angel that basically just wrecks shit, and his name is Apollyon. So it all has the same sort of root, and the conceit of apocalyptic horror is you have to have something to destroy, right? So it's usually about the downfall of things we've created, like society, structure, judicial systems, food supplies, things like that. And it usually entails humanity and what's left of it regressing into a more barbaric state. It's kind of cemented in our minds that it says something, I think, about humanity's view of itself, that we're basically one bad day away from cannibalism and like mass rape. That's the story I got from most of the apocalyptic stories I read.
I feel like bad things are happening all the time.
Well, that's the other thing, is...
But it can't be really considered an apocalypse. And also with COVID coming out and all the things that happened during COVID, that I think is probably the closest we've felt to
Of our generation,
yes,
certainly.
of an
Yeah, but
apocalypse.
anybody growing up in the 1940s experienced, the only nuclear war. And anybody growing up in the 60s, the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the threat of annihilation was quite real. So, yeah, anybody living the last few years read about North Korea every few days of like, oh, they're going to nuke us. They're going to nuke this. They're going to nuke that. It's always sort of in our minds. And it's because we're finite beings. We think about death because death is a part of our existence. So we think about the death of all things.
And in the 1950s and 60s, I can imagine the drills that they were doing
Yeah,
in schools.
I would say
duck and cover.
It's definitely accelerated since the dawn of the atomic age. Since mankind created a very convenient and quick way to annihilate all life on Earth several times over, I think apocalyptic horror has become much more in the forefront of our collective consciousness, and with good reason.
I mean, it wouldn't be much of an entertaining movie if it did wipe everything out.
No,
in
I mean,
fell swoop.
That's the interesting part of apocalyptic horror is it's never the end of everything. There's still something left, and that is where you get the story, and the interest is what's left and what condition is it in.
Yes.
And what form does life, does structure, does society take if everything you knew has ended, or if resources have become dwindled, the population is dwindled, things like that. Or if, people are driving around in muscle cars with like mohawks and, shooting harpoons and stuff.
Yeah. I want to mention some tropes within the genre of apocalyptic horror.
Apocatropes.
Right. Cryo sleep, robots,
yeah.
time travel,
Nice.
plagues,
Ooh.
technological advancements and weaponry,
AI.
aliens, parallel worlds,
Oof.
rebellions,
No.
dystopian governments, and destroyed planet or ecosystems.
See, the dystopian government one, I think, is the worst because humanity's not very good at detecting creeping threats, and that's the one that seems to have already happened. The dystopia, it's hard to fight that because it takes like decades and it's a total cultural shift.
Yeah.
It's not like, an asteroid on its way,
Right.
where everybody can rally behind that. I didn't get into dystopias because I feel like that's a whole different episode, but it's interesting that you mentioned that. That is sort of the opposite of it's literally the opposite of a utopia.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is itself kind of an apocalypse in that it's a breakdown of free society.
Yeah, so let's go into some of the characteristics. One is widespread destruction and chaos.
Yeah, you got to break some shit.
Yeah, I mean, people, there's lawlessness, there's ATMs don't work.
No.
Grocery stores are raided.
Yeah. People pushing grannies down the stairs.
Yeah.
Cats and dogs living together. Mass hysteria.
Then we have survival of the fittest mentality, which, doesn't necessarily mean that people feeling that way are.
That always
In fact,
seems
the
to rear
fittest.
its head, in these
Think
tales.
about something like The Purge.
Yeah, like there's some motherfucker with a big club
Yeah.
who just takes over.
Resourcefulness, access.
Ruthlessness.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean fittest, but.
Also, I find apocalyptic tales interesting because it also offers a playground for like psychotic characters.
Yes. Scarcity of resources,
Yeah, that's an issue.
which we mentioned. Post-apocalyptic societies and communities forming.
Yeah, like little, villages like in The Last of Us. They had that little village, and
Some will
The
always
Walking
be
Dead.
like loners or just stick into their own, and others will want to try to recreate some semblance of a society,
Yeah.
which I think is an interesting approach to have both characters.
and then you've got, your drunk uncle who talks about how he would be the best at the apocalypse, but won't wear a mask.
Yeah. Exploration of human nature and morality in extreme circumstances, which we talked about.
Yeah,
What would you do to survive?
Exactly.
To protect your family?
Also,
Your morals need to change.
Does it matter?
Right.
Are morals defined by individual actions or by the constructs of society? Meaning, like, do we do the right thing because we don't want to get in trouble or because it's the right thing? And, well, how flexible is that when your kid is starving?
And why can't it be both?
Exactly.
And sometimes it's one or the other, but...
You know, you get characters like Joel from The Last of Us, who is ostensibly the quote-unquote good guy, but is not a good guy.
He does a lot of questionable things.
Very bad things.
Mutilated or evolved creatures.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
this is where your zombie apocalypse
Yeah. I stayed away from zombies and stuff in my recommendations and deep dives because that's its own thing. But yeah, you get some funky creatures.
I also did. Because I feel like we've talked about it a lot.
Totally.
And whenever you think of apocalyptic movie, it's zombies.
Apocalypti.
Heroic individuals or groups fighting against the odds.
Yeah. Usually in a sort of existential grind of like attrition where they're not going to win. It's just a matter of time.
So some broad mentions we wanted to run through here are just some of the common things that you're all thinking. 28 days later, 28 weeks later.
I Am Legend.
Revolves around a virus that turns anyone infected into violent, psychotic rage monster.
It's called Rage.
Zombie comedy, Zombieland. Another comedy, Warm Bodies, adds sort of like a romance of a zombie in love with an infected woman.
The whole like Night of the Living Dead series.
Yeah, The Walking Dead.
Once
all
zombies get
iterations.
involved, apocalypse usually follows.
We have World War Z.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King's The Stand follows a small number of survivors of a world-ending influenza pandemic.
It's been adapted a few times itself. Yeah.
It's revealed to be a man-made super flu.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It's
called
based
Captain
on a short
Trips.
story called Night Serve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Richard Matheson, not to be confused with our co-host Richard Mathiasen.
No.
In the novel I Am Legend, deals with the life of Robert Neville, the only unaffected survivor of a global pandemic that turns everybody into vampire zombies.
That is one of Richard Mathiesen's favorite books, by the way.
No, it's so confusing over here.
Someone did literally ask me that once, if I was related, and I think I responded like, well, we do spell and pronounce our names differently. But yeah, we are.
The Last of Us, which we have talked about, started out as, the video game, the cordyceps fungus, spreading to humans. And so here now we have AI and machines with the Terminator franchise. John Connor and his mother, Sarah Connor.
Get down.
And one of my favorite directors, Escape from New York. And then the sequel, Escape from LA. Basically started out of comic books, right?
John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know I needed to say it. New York City's been walled off and turned into a gigantic maximum security prison.
Where Isaac Hayes runs supreme.
400% rise in crime.
Oh, no.
Took place in 1988.
Basically, Escape from New York is like turning on Fox News at any point.
Yeah.
It's like how they describe any city.
Yeah.
Just Isaac Hayes riding around with Adrienne Barbeau, wreaking havoc. So one of the things that I wanted to mention that really took me by surprise is how differently I felt after doing all the prep work for this episode. I used to be really into this kind of stuff. Apocalyptic horror, post-apocalyptic. I remember being younger and reading I Am Legend and thinking, honestly, there are elements of it that appealed to me. Like, what if I was the only person in New York? Like, I could go anywhere, do anything, play around like the whole world. That episode of The Twilight Zone where Burgess Meredith, has all the books in the world, right up until the part where he breaks his glasses. I'm like, wow, that sounds great to me. I was a lonely kid. But I've found that all these years later, maybe it's the fact of growing older, maybe it's a fact of things have been kind of a bummer the last 20 years. It really hit me differently. And because I also kind of specifically focused on a very particular brand of apocalyptic horror in my research, oh man, it just bummed me the fuck out. Because, and I realized, unlike something like vampires or zombies or, exorcisms, so much of this is plausible. If not the inciting event itself, maybe that is supernatural or something, but the human behavior aspect, the deconstruction of our morality, of our humanity, the way we treat each other, that all seems really pessimistic, but also probably likely. Especially having been through the lockdowns and seeing how some people behaved themselves and continue to behave over what was, in comparison to the movies we're going to be discussing, pretty mild.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't give me a lot of hope. So I really changed my attitude. Apocalyptic horror used to be for me kind of escapist. Because I was like, wow, this is ridiculous.
Well, I think it
never going to
harkens
happen.
back to what we just survived, which was COVID.
Well, I'm starting to wonder if it's an element of me just getting older and, clinging more closely to life and being more in touch with my own mortality, or if it's because it's just been fucking awful and, the thought of things breaking down severely seems less fantastic to me.
Yep.
But sorry, everybody. And I think that's the reason why, ever since the 1950s, apocalyptic horror has been a evergreen subgenre of horror and science fiction. It's because we're all thinking about it. We're always thinking about it. It does seem plausible. There's a million ways it could happen. And we just keep coming up with new ways to think about, well, how do we all go?
Yes, absolutely.
And I guess if you say it like that, there is a sort of beauty to it of like, well, at least we go together.
Yeah.
Yay. Most of us. And then the rest turn into mutants and eat each other.
And then you don't really, you're just trying to survive. That's the thing.
All burnt up and, weird. Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you that my first post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic experience in the literary world was before any film, was the book Z for Zachariah.
Oh, shit.
It was published posthumously in 1974 by Robert O'Brien. And Robert O'Brien was the pen name used by Robert Leslie Conley. Now, why I'm saying all this is that Robert O'Brien was a juvenile literature writer.
Yeah, YA.
He wrote Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah.
The cartoon that scared the shit out of me.
Well, they
as a
made
kid.
it into a cartoon, but originally it was a book,
so
and
good,
it's incredible
though.
and sad.
I know, but the cartoon is amazing.
It's amazing.
And also
it's
scary as hell.
So wonderful. Anyway,
Wow.
his wife and daughter had to finish this novel because, he passed away, and it was going to be his second adult novel.
What a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And it was pretty well regarded, won the Edgar Award for Best Mystery Fiction.
Wow.
So
Not
anyway,
bad for a dead guy.
It's set in the colonial territory of the U.S., written from the first perspective person of a diary from a 16-year-old girl named Anne Burden. She survived nuclear war and nerve gas by living in a small valley with an isolated microclimate. And she believes she's the last survivor. About a year after, a stranger with a radiation suit approaches the valley, and his name is John Loomis. And he's a chemist who developed a prototype radiation-proof safe suit in an underground lab. And she moves him into her house and fantasizes about eventually marrying him. So the book starts to take shape. Things fall apart. There is a movie which does not seem like a very accurate reflection of the book.
Oh, that's too bad.
Starring Barbie.
Margot Robbie?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
no kidding.
Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Oh, nice.
And Chris Pine, maybe?
I've never even heard of it. Wow.
Yeah, it's sort of like, both men. She's the last woman on Earth type of thing. And in some ways, this book is touching on that. But again, they're not going to have a 16-year-old with an older man in a movie that wants legitimacy.
Once again, what is morality once there is no society?
Right.
Or human population.
So it's an interesting take on how this girl needs to survive and then survive another perceived. I mean, is he good or is he bad?
Nice.
It was an amazing experience. I read it when I was a kid.
I think my earliest was probably reading The Stand. When I was like 16 or 17. That was my first like real, apocalypse. But probably around the same time I saw The Road Warrior. I want to briefly mention a movie that is not a horror movie, but it is one of the best representations of the human condition in the face of extinction. And that is 1959's classic Stanley Kramer film On the Beach. This movie is... Talk about a cast. It's Gregory Peck, Fred Astaire, Anthony Perkins, Ava Gardner. They're basically all living in Australia. Mm-hmm. Nuclear Armageddon has already happened, and they're just waiting for the poisonous cloud of nuclear fallout to hit them and kill everyone in Australia. So it's like the last days of these people as they live, love, and,
Not
fuck.
laugh.
And kind of live out this pessimistic, hedonistic end of days scenario, and what that would do to your psyche. Just like, well, it's like another week until we all, die horribly. So
It's sort of like, what would you do if you
should I go to work today?
24 hours to live.
Yeah, but it's worse than that, because I feel like if you had 24 hours to live, you could be frantic and then it's over. This is like months.
Usually it's not.
They have 3
months. What would
months.
you do if everyone had 24 hours to live? It's usually like, what would you do if you were the one? But
the thing about this movie, though, is that it takes place over a period of months. So you see this degradation of people as they really lose their minds, because in a way, it's almost worse, like waiting to die. And also, you're not ignorant to the way you're going to go. You're going to die by radiation poisoning, and that is not pleasant. So anyway, it's not a horror movie, but it is horrific thematically. On the Beach, it's a fucking corker. You want to take a break?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Are you tired of being told to calm down? Annoyed at no one believing you when you say you see someone outside, or in the house, or following you home? Finally, a solution for you to prove once and for all you got this. Introducing Final Girl CBD Seltzer. FG CBD Seltzer combines everything you love about that sparkly, bubbly treat with the calming and focused effect of cannabidiol. With just one 12-ounce can of FG CBD, you can make it through every bump in the night, hysterical frenemy outburst, inappropriate or unwanted romantic overtures, and jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. Try our enticing flavors like Redemption Raspberry, Exhausted by Elderberry, Extra Virgin Mary, and Mellow Melon Maniac. With each sip, feel all of the nonsense coming from those around you melt away while you figure out how to get yourself out of this fucking nightmare. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not make this amazing sounding seltzer for any reason, but if we did, this would be a great niche market. But we don't, and most likely won't.
And we're back.
Hi.
Hello. Oh, gosh. Look outside. Everything's on fire.
Well, come on.
Mutants everywhere.
Do you want to get into our mentions?
Yeah,
our specific mentions?
Obviously, for this episode, as with all episodes, the terror team spent a good amount of time traumatizing ourselves for your benefit.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Ungrateful. Would you like to go first, or shall I?
I'll go first.
Oh, let's do it.
So my first mention is...
And last. Get it?
I do. My first mention is Daybreakers from 2019.
Oh, no kidding.
Starring Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe, and Sam Neill.
Underrated.
The directors are the Spierig brothers.
Yeah, the Spierig brothers.
Yep. So basically, the world ends in, like, infected humans become vampires. This is like the lead into the world ending. But the problem is that now there are so many vampires that the vampires become the majority of the population, and they're running out of blood. And when they're deprived of blood too long, they become like zombified, destructive, violent goobers.
Yes.
So a vampire hematologist, well, he was a hematologist, but now he's a vampire hematologist.
I mean, it's a handy thing to be if you're a vampire.
Yeah. Played by Ethan Hawke, teams up with the two surviving humans to develop a substitute. And so Ethan Hawke plays Edward Dalton. As I mentioned, he's a hematologist. He was infected by his brother, and he started working on Bromley Marks to work on a blood substitute. He feels, for the humans, he hasn't lost his humanity, which I think is a really interesting portrayal of this character, because he refused to be turned at the start of the plague and refused to drink human blood. So he was relied on animal blood. And he volunteers to be turned back into human, and essentially leads this revolution to return the human race back to human form. Willem Dafoe plays Elvis, Lionel Elvis Cormac.
Hell yeah.
He's a former professional mechanic, and he was one of the first in the city to adapt these daylight cars. So for those of you that haven't seen it, there are these specific cars that allow the vampires to travel during the day.
It's got special tinting. The world building in this movie is awesome. Great. It really creates...
It's really sci-fi.
This whole new world and with backstory and history to it, and it's
got exterior...
As fantastic as the idea is, it's laid out in a way of a progressive way that you're kind of like, oh yeah, I guess that could lead there.
You're sort of thrust into this world. It doesn't start with day one.
No, but it does a good job of you don't get lost. It brings you up to speed pretty well.
The cars, they have this, retractable UV screen, and then they have cameras on the outside.
It's definitely better than Near Dark solution of where they were just driving with jackets over their heads and catching fire.
Yeah. I mean, he at one point in this film, he is so deprived of blood, Willem Dafoe, he crashes and explodes out into the car and bursts into flames.
Yep.
And then
that's a plot point right there.
A human saves him from the sun. It's really, I mean, what you did mention is it's underrated.
The Spierig brothers really know how to craft an action sequence. It's kind of an action horror movie. There's some really good violence in this one.
It is. It's very wet.
And the color scheme is sort of grayish, washed out. It's like everything is in permanent twilight in this movie. And it gives it this depressive, futuristic, almost fascistic feel to it, where everything is sterile.
And I forgot to mention too, all of the surviving humans, well, when they are found, they're rounded up and harvested in labs so that researchers can find a synthetic substitute for blood.
Oh yeah. So and also, it's the best way to keep a human food supply isn't to kill them. So a lot of folks are just sort of kept alive.
So there's the legit, quote unquote, the legitimate path of taking the humans and putting them in labs and trying to get a viable substitute so that
they're trying to invent True Blood, basically.
Yeah. And then
that's what True Blood. They're the
Subsiders.
Not a lot of people talk about it. As True Blood is an unofficial sequel to this movie.
I think they're called Subsiders. The crazy vampiric.
Yeah.
Beings.
Blood-starved weirdos.
They just basically keep a host of bodies. I mean, people aren't thinking, how can I survive long term? They're thirsty and they drain and then they move on.
Yeah, I mean, they're vampires. Vampires are not known for their restraint.
The interesting part of this is that it is people who are humans that are no longer human, still trying to save humanity.
It's absolutely allegorical to, climate change and resource scarcity, because this is a manufactured problem that the vampires are running out of blood because they overdid it. And the only way out of it is a very unconventional, radical method that requires cooperation.
Yep.
And boy, doesn't that sound familiar. That's not easy to do, get people to cooperate, or vampires or real people or anyone.
Yes.
I love that movie. I'm so glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, nobody ever talks about it. We didn't mention it in our vampire episode.
No.
So
Daybreakers, nice. My first apocalypse is it's a twofer. It's a book and a movie. And I am talking about, now you mentioned I Am Legend. That is one of my favorite books. This one is also one of my top 5 favorite books. And that is 2006 The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
it is bleak.
Yes. That was later adapted into a movie in 2009 by John Hillcoat. Now, Hillcoat is a really interesting director. He is primarily a music video director with a pretty incredible filmography. He's done music videos for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Susie and the Banshees, Johnny Cash, Massive Attack, In Excess, Elvis Costello. I mean, he's like basically if the character from High Fidelity like chose who to shoot music videos for.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So he directed the movie version. I'm going to talk about the book first because it's an absolute masterpiece. It is written in short sections that are almost like stanzas, and the use of language and the structure of the book, it reads like an epic prose poem.
It's sort of like if you were jotting down things in a notebook.
In a way, yes, because Cormac McCarthy's use of language is masterful. He is able to condense things in a way that honestly would make Ernest Hemingway jealous. Without losing any of the depth or intelligence, he's able to write these clipped short sentences and paragraphs that just hammer home exactly what he's talking about. So in The Road, it's about a father and son who are known only as man and boy. They're traveling through a post-apocalyptic America after a calamity that is never named, but the earth is covered in ash. So it's basically like a nuclear winter kind of thing. The sun really doesn't come out. There's ash everywhere. And everyone's a cannibal. So there's a lot of cannibalism. Not man and boy. They're not cannibals. But man has a gun with 2 bullets. And those bullets are not to fight cannibals.
No, they're for him and his
For him
son.
and boy. Yeah. So
Or boy. I mean, do you know that it's his son?
you do, because in flashbacks there is woman who killed herself. She had boy, was pregnant with boy during the calamity, had him afterwards, and then there used to be 3 bullets. And at some point, the man used one of the bullets to kill an intruder, and woman flipped out basically because she wanted to use it on herself. So she just took off all her clothes and walked off into the woods and was never seen again. It's bleak. So man and boy are traveling across just every day, scrounging to survive. They run across other characters with names like veteran, thief. No one has a real name. Everyone is sort of dangerous, dehumanized. And you learn things about man as well, and through his actions, where it's another case of he's not a good guy. He's not a nice person, but everything is to protect his son. And it's really twisty with morality. Now, anybody who's read Cormac McCarthy before knows that his work is often very bleak and very violent, and really he writes a lot about cannibals. So
and he uses like you said with the concise language, but he doesn't use a lot of punctuation either.
Yes, it's not it's very hard to describe. Sometimes he uses apostrophes for conjunctions, other times he doesn't. It doesn't seem to follow a discernible pattern, but it works. It is manipulation of the English language, I think, that you could only achieve if you were a master of it. Like an amateur couldn't pull this off. It wouldn't read well. I want to read one line from the book, just to give you a sort of better idea of the kind of writing. So this is the ending of one of the paragraphs early on in the book, describing man and boy. They set out along the blacktop in the gunmetal light, shuffling through the ash, each the other's world entire. So, yeah. Now, that brings me into the movie. The movie is pretty good. It's a very faithful adaptation of the book. It's got a great cast with Viggo Mortensen as man, Cody Smith-McPhee as boy, Charlize Theron playing woman. It's got Robert Duvall, Molly Parker, Michael K. Williams, Garrett Dillahunt. So it's pretty stacked.
Michael K. Williams.
The cinematography is incredible. It's just the problem is in translation to the screen, you lose the beauty of McCarthy's exposition and his language. And there's just no way around that because the movie does a good job of adapting the book and showing things, but by design, you miss out on the poetry of McCarthy's writing. And that is why the book is superior in my opinion. It's not that the movie takes liberties or changes things, like Knock at the Cabin changed some things that really ruined it for us. This doesn't do that. It just doesn't translate with the same beauty. But if all you do is watch the movie, it's really good. It's very, very dark. It's very bleak. It doesn't end happily, or actually it kind of does, but in this world, you really have to readjust your level for success and happiness. But it's very well done. It's well acted. Viggo Mortensen is great in everything he does. But if you only do one, definitely read the book. It's not a long book, but it's a book that you want to take your time with.
Yeah.
Because it's a feast.
He also wrote No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yeah. Blood Meridian, All the Pretty Horses.
And most recently, The Passenger and its companion Stella Maris. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because The Passenger's plot is about Bobby Western, who was haunted by his father's contributions to the development of the atomic bomb.
Fascinating. Yeah, he's always written about Americana, typically about the West. But this was inspired on a real trip he took to the New Mexico desert where he was with his son, and he just started to think, what would it be like 100 years from now? And his answer was, everyone's a cannibal. So, yeah.
Well, he's pretty well enmeshed in New Mexico. He worked or created the Santa Fe Institute. And so a lot of his books take place in the West, in the Wild West.
Oh, yeah. Blood Meridian and All the Pretty Horses, No Country for Old Men, especially. That's sort of his trilogy.
Yeah.
They're not connected by plot, but by theme.
Right.
But The Road is a deviation. It's strictly a post-apocalypse, tale of just scrappy survival, and it's dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Know that going into it.
Awesome.
Oh, Guy Pearce is in it too. I should have mentioned that.
Oh.
He's awesome in it.
My next is a trio.
Ah.
A duo, and soon to be a trio.
Got it.
So A Quiet Place 1, 2, and Day 1, which is coming out this summer.
Yeah.
So A Quiet Place 1 came out in 2018, followed by A Quiet Place 2 in 2020. Blind aliens with very hyper sense of sound have annihilated most of the Earth's population, leaving only a few survivors. John Krasinski directed this, as well as stars in with his wife, Emily Blunt. And it follows their family living on a farm, just trying to get back to life, but also survive. And, you know, they really don't have any designs on moving on. That's in the first one. In the second one, they have to move on. And by they, I mean the remaining family members. I know it only came out in 2018, but I don't want to spoil all of it.
Oh, man. Listen, I don't know about you, but I was not expecting John Krasinski to nail a horror movie like A Quiet Place.
I mean
it's
directing and starring
awesome.
in it, no, it's incredible.
He crushes it.
The second one brings in Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
And
Jaimin Hansao.
Yep. So I think we'll see maybe them.
No, Jaimin Hansao was in the trailer for the prequel,
third.
which is it's like
It's a
day
prequel,
one.
right.
Yeah. So I guess you get a bit of his backstory.
But what's really interesting is the only true way to survive these monsters, and, you know, you have to learn it by default, is you have to remain absolutely quiet.
Yeah, shut the fuck up.
Not even the smallest noise can be made. So what we happen upon in the first is a pregnant Emily Blunt, which adds a whole layer of fear to the film.
Yeah.
And there is a scene of where she gives birth in the tub, and that is horrifying.
It's tough being pregnant when society is ostensibly functioning.
Yeah. So, and also just think about what would be involved in trying not to make one sound while giving birth
In a bathtub.
without any doctor
By yourself.
support.
Yeah.
Correct.
Quiet. Super quiet.
But what they also have a daughter who is deaf, played by Millicent Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
And they use that disability to their advantage. It becomes a strength, which is just so well done. I really appreciate that aspect of the film.
Yeah, the
And
fact that the whole family knows ASL is like key to their survival.
it is. And it really does bring the idea of a disability as possibly an advantage. So
that becomes even more pronounced at the end of the first movie and the second movie.
yes, absolutely. Also, the techniques in which they have created ways to be alerted,
it's
to
awesome.
check in
Yeah.
on other people that are still surviving in, visual space.
The adaptations they make to their routines and their lives to be silent are pretty cool.
And then in the second one, when you have a new baby, how do you keep that baby quiet? And how they do it is frighteningly necessary.
Yeah, let's just say don't do it now. You'd get arrested.
Yeah. But, it brings into question how a family can survive by working together and using their strengths as a family, and, what the decisions they need to make in order to maintain the safety of the largest part of the family.
Yeah.
As we move into the second film, it's really more about displacement and finding a place to be safe. So it's really a moving, and I mean physically moving, not emotionally moving, moving from spot to spot to ensure your safety for your family. It's really all about parents.
Yeah.
And protecting your kids. And how is that going to work?
Just want my kids back.
And so then we go to day one, which is coming out later this year, which is, as Richard mentioned, a prequel.
Directed by Michael Sarnofsky of the superlative Pig that came out a couple of years ago.
And we're going to have a darling of ours, Lupita Nyong'o.
Oh, the best.
And a cat.
Yeah.
So it's going to show you day one. When
cat.
this all came to be and how the early days of this apocalypse started to occur. And so I really am glad, because I like this universe. It doesn't get into the awkward of having people's story continue to go on, maybe where there isn't a story to go on.
Oh,
You
yeah?
know, after the second one, some
Talk about
folks-
Fear the Island of the Village of the Walking Dead,
Right.
season 30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good way to round out the trilogy. I believe John Krasinski always said it was a trilogy.
Yeah, he's actually directing a third installment of it. This is a prequel, and he's going to be doing
Oh,
A Quiet
okay.
Place 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But this is still in that universe.
It is, yes.
Is he directing this one?
No, Michael Sarnofsky of The Superlative Pig that I
right,
mentioned
you
a few
just
minutes
mentioned
ago.
that. Sorry.
Starring Nicolas
that.
Cage. Everyone watch it.
Yeah. So
And Alex Wolff.
that is my recommendation and mention.
Nice.
Second mention.
My next menchie is a book. Came out in 1987. We're talking Robert McCammon's classic epic Swan Song. Now, Swan Song has been, over the years, kind of unfairly lumped in with The Stand because it's like a 1,000-page post-apocalyptic epic that came out 3 years before Stephen King re-released the unedited, the definitive version of The Stand. And there are some similarities. It's post-apocalyptic America after a nuclear war, unlike the superflu in the Stand. It's after a nuclear war, and different groups of people have intersecting stories. They sort of are traveling, and they come together, much like the Stand. So in this one, which, funnily enough, it tied the win for Bram Stoker Award in 1987 with Stephen King for Misery. So in this movie, them Soviets, boy, they done dropped the big one, and so did we. So America is an irradiated nightmare. Lots and lots of people die, and it follows different groups of people. There's Josh and Sue, who is the swan of Swan Song. There's this unhoused woman named Sister Creep, which is dope, who finds a magic ring. Okay. And then there's this condition that starts affecting the survivors called Job's Mask, where their faces start to become covered in like this really hard scar tissue, calloused skin covering that eventually covers their whole face. And then that turns into something that becomes a major plot point in the book. And it's actually pretty incredible. There's a whole conspiracy story that is kind of straight out of Doctor Strangelove, but unironically. But it's massive. It's epic. It's got different groups with their stories, and you learn as they move together the ways that they intersect and come together, all towards a massive conclusion with this evil colonel that survived. And it shows the different ways people react to the end of America. Yeah. There are the ones that refuse to let go of the idea of American exceptionalism. So they create sort of a hyper-patriotic, militaristic society, which
we're going to have in Civil War, it looks like. Alex
Garland, yeah, or in real life, maybe.
No.
And hopefully not.
I don't want that.
Don't want that either. Everyone vote. So it's a great read. It is friend of the pod. Shout out to our friend Kevin. It's his favorite book. Talks about it all the time. And when we first met, I was so happy to find someone else that had read and loved this book. It comes out of a real classic era of Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Dan Simmons, Clive Barker, Robert McCammon, writing wonderful, wonderful novels like this. And speaking of The Walking Dead, it was recently announced that Greg Nicotero himself has picked up the rights to turn this into a TV series.
Oh, wow.
So that's cool because he can legit manufacture a good apocalypse. But I just hope that it's maybe a mini series or a one season thing instead of Fear the Swan Song or Sue Wanda, the Book of Swan. I don't want to see any of that. Just leave it as it is.
Yeah.
So the 1987 novel, it's a big one, but it's a pretty, it's not like a Dostoevsky or anything. No disrespect. It's a good breezy read, but it's a tome of a novel. Really, really great. It's a good mix up of that 1980s Soviet panic with classic Stephen King style, mysticism in the post-apocalypse and a lot of Americana. So I highly recommend it. Swan Song.
Nice. My last is something I'm pretty sure that we watched together. I'm not sure. It's called It Comes at Night from 2017.
We watched Daybreakers together, but we did not watch It Comes at Night together. With Joel Edgerton?
Yep.
No.
So yeah, it stars Joel Edgerton, Christopher Abbott, Riley Keough, and it's directed by Trey Edward Schultz. Came out in 2017. It talks about, or shares with you this family living isolated in the deep, deep woods in an effort to evade a deadly contagion that's taken out much of the population. I mean, does it sound familiar? The film does use some body horror, especially with people that are infected. So just a warning that it is real gooey
Gets
at
a little
times.
chunky.
Yeah.
I like my oatmeal lumpy.
But most of the horror actually is in the form of what lengths people go to survive, and mistrust and manipulation of each other.
Spoiler alert, people are the fucking worst.
The film itself is kicked off by an intruder breaking into the family's home, and they bring the intruder and his family, the intruder's family, into the fold for protection, determining that they're not infectious, and they're seemingly not harmful. Seemingly. So they remain healthy throughout their experience here, and the one caution is that you cannot go out at night. So of course, in the tradition of good horror, this goes wrong.
Yeah.
That fear of infection, though, is really the primary driver of the film. Who's infected? Are they going to get infected? It's a real
kind of like The Thing.
Yeah, it's a real good stressor.
It's paranoia.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's definitely a psychological, because of the mistrust of each other and how you manipulate one another into getting what you want, or getting you to make a decision, or even the new family showing up. They broke in, but they need shelter. So what was that approach all about? And you find it out. It's a super dark film. I mean, like visually dark.
Yes.
Like it's a dark film because most of it takes place. They don't have a lot.
It's in the
of
title,
light.
people.
Yeah.
It's not. It comes at daylight.
No, but also they're in the middle of the woods. They don't want to attract the infected. And it's also like a figuratively dark film. It does have a feeling of like a zombie with the contagion, and people that have died aren't maybe dead completely. But I would say it's one of those films that could have gone either way, or still can, if depending on who's watching it.
It's a divisive film. I mean, some people don't like the slow burn element of it.
Right, but it could, what I mean is genre. It could fit into a thriller or a drama. It is definitely a horror film, but also a lot of people don't want to put, human decision making and manipulation and lying and, power and control and everything into a horror. They want that
What's
to
more
be like,
horrific than each other?
Cinematic drama.
Yeah.
But it has got the goo factor. It's got all the good things. It is a quiet movie.
You had me at goo factor.
Unlike A Quiet Place, it is a quiet movie, like you said, a slow burn, which I'm not always in love with, but
I usually am.
The people in it and the way that they lay this story out, and actually just the edge of the seat infection coming to the door,
Yeah.
It's
I don't
good.
want to be infected with anything.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it after it, within like the 2020-21 zone.
Yeah, the funnest time.
So it was very, it was very realistic. at
there
that
was
point.
a time in lockdown
When you want to like escape in the middle of the woods, here's what you're up against.
we were all watching like pandemic movies and going
I
through.
wasn't.
I mean, it's fucked
but
up.
A lot of people were watching Contagion.
Yeah.
They rewatched Contagion. They rewatched that other one with.
I rewatched The Bay, which isn't even that great, but it's gross.
Yeah.
Um,
So
Nice.
it comes at night.
Yeah. Well, my final one is a tough one. Apologies to any British listeners of a certain age, because I'm going to be bringing up some childhood trauma for you. I am talking about the made-for-TV, if you can fucking believe it, generation traumatizing classic Threads from 1984, directed by Mick Jackson, who had a very interesting career. He later went on to direct what I think is the very underrated LA Story with Steve Martin and The Bodyguard. Also Volcano, that movie where Tommy Lee Jones fights a volcano that erupts underneath Hollywood Boulevard.
No.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Well, I think a lot of people have that reaction. So this movie was unleashed upon the public in 1984, and it is a fake documentary, narrated and everything, about a nuclear attack on the real town of Sheffield in England, and basically how that goes and what happens next. So it is it's excruciating. I'm just going to lay it out there. Now, this is, I think, mandatory viewing if you are a human person, because nothing depicts the horrors of nuclear war better than this movie. It's been done before, it's been done since, it's never been done better. So it starts off pretty slow. Life in Sheffield. It follows, a couple that are planning a wedding because they're expecting, and a couple different people around this sort of middle class, working class town. Mm-hmm. And you get hints of what's going on through like the way that they would get their information, which is like hearing it on the telly in the pub while they're having, a beer. And they have comments of like, wow, you hear what's going on in the Middle East? And a lot of it is like, no, why? Why do I care? And it's understandable.
Yeah.
Why do we all have to be experts in geopolitics? Can't we just go to work and live our lives? Isn't that the point of having a government? So what ends up happening in this fictitious scenario that is shot like it's real, like it's a historical account of really what's happening. Basically, the Soviet Union invades northern Iran, and America invades southern Iran, and then NATO and the Warsaw Pact start lobbing nukes at each other, and by the end, I think they say that 30,000 megatons worth of nuclear weapons were exchanged. So the poor people of Sheffield, we follow some of the municipal workers as they're planning for this event, and the action is sort of intercut with title cards that give you a little background on what's happening. So in between something, it'll have a title card that says like how many people died in the initial blast. And that really hammers home on what was a limited TV budget, the horrors of what's going on. Now, first there's a nuclear attack off the coast, which knocks out communications. Then there's an attack about 15 miles away, which causes a shockwave to ripple through the town and blinds people with the flash. And then Sheffield itself gets hit with a bomb. And that is, to this day, extremely difficult to watch.
Yeah, I bet, especially for people that live there.
This movie is shot in such a way where the camera really focuses on people, real people. And they all, by the end of this movie, have this look on their face of absolute trauma. And you just see, it's quite shocking what made it onto television, especially in the 1980s. It's very visceral. It's very bleak. It follows up to 13 years after the attack, and you really see the breakdown of society, and you follow, the expectant mother from the beginning of the movie. She has the child, and the children brought up in this wasteland of a future barely speak English because there's no education system. Mm-hmm. So they kind of talk like the feral kids from Mad Max. And it's a nightmare. It ends in one of the darkest, bleakest, most depressing endings I've ever seen in a movie. It's a movie that I've only seen twice in my life because the first time I saw it, it really did a number on me.
Why did you watch it again?
I wanted to have it fresh in my mind for this episode, and I watched most of it with tears in my eyes because imagining it today with the way that some elected leaders like to use those words as sort of bravado and like ways to demonstrate that they're tough. This movie is such an unrelenting view of what happens. Now, it's one thing to stand in front of Congress and pound your chest and call for the destruction of your enemies. It's another thing to be a working class mom in Sheffield, England, dealing with a nuclear fucking bomb that just went off, and you don't know why. And you don't care. There's a real element watching this movie reminded me of the start of World War I, which was essentially just a bunch of monarchs with grudges against each other that the common man had no fucking idea about or inclination towards, and it killed 10 million people. This is the same feel of that. It's regular people going about their business while governments make decisions above their heads and end basically most of life on Earth. It goes through nuclear winter, through agriculture. I mean, it really, really takes you through the logistics of, because it's like a documentary. So it takes you through like the everyday logistics of living in a nuclear winter, and the title cards that intercut the scenes of humanity as it regresses and degrades. I mean, these people, the special effects in this movie are incredible and very gross. And Threads, listen, it's not an enjoyable watch, but I maintain it should be essential viewing for humanity. I think everyone needs to watch this movie, because if you get through the end of this and you still think that nuclear weapons are like a viable solution to anything, then you're a fucking psychopath. Now, I want to make quick mention of this real life phenomenon. This is a real place. 2,000 feet beneath the surface of New Mexico, there's a mass repository of nuclear waste that was made in our frenzied attempt to develop weapons that could end all life on Earth 100 times over. Now, the byproduct of this will remain toxic to any form of life for hundreds of thousands of years. And the only thing to do with it is to dig a massive tunnel underneath the desert, store it, and then fill it up with concrete with a warning sign over it, which is what we've done. And also they're building a new one in Finland because there's just so much of this stuff. Now, the warning sign that is placed above the repository in New Mexico literally reads, "This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. This message is a warning about danger." Now, if only we were so mindful of the words we're leading to our optimistic, descendants. Yeah. That is quite a self-referential, admission of the obscenity of what you've created. And I'm telling you, Threads is a life-changing movie. It is a horror movie because it's horrific in its depiction of what happens, but I think the next person who says to you, "Oh, we should just bomb them or something," make them watch this movie.
Yeah.
Because this is what it looks like. And, nuclear weapons aside, that sort of societal devastation and breakdown is happening right now in several places across the world.
There's always the threat.
Cities being bombed out, food supplies being destroyed, education breaking down. That's happening now. Yeah. And this is a very realistic and heartbreaking depiction of what that looks like in your neighborhood.
Yeah. And if it
Threads.
Is or has happened in your neighborhood.
Again, to my British friends, I'm sorry. I know that I literally brought this up to a friend of mine years ago, and his response was like, What? Why are you fucking asking me about that? Why? He didn't want to talk about it. Yeah. Because he saw it as a kid, and it really messed him up.
Yeah, obviously. I think it's interesting that our separate approach to this episode was not one of zombies.
I think it's also interesting that I normally like to go a bit goofy with these things, and I went real somber.
Yeah, you did. This is all serious.
I wanted
we didn't do any comedies or anything.
We didn't do like Anna and the Apocalypse or Shaun of the Dead, which are hilarious apocalyptic movies.
And I think we've talked about those in other episodes, and there are other episodes where we should, but maybe I'm just really talking about apocalypse here.
Yeah. Hey, and I'm feeling real
February. We're taking this subject serious because it does really have the most reflection of what humans are capable of.
That's what I like about these stories is I think the best apocalyptic tales take a grand event but focus on a small portion of it. So you've got in the background the epic end of the world stuff, but you're focused on a family trying to survive. And that's where like the pathos and the drama comes in, movies like A Quiet Place, where it's a big world-spanning event, but you're really just following this group of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's apocalyptic horror, everybody. No way to really tie this up with a happy ribbon because it's the end of all things.
Yeah.
So
including this episode. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're static.